My wife was seduced by an ex-boyfriend. Cassie and I have been married for 5 years and have been together for about 5 years before that. I suppose you could say we've been in love since we were kids. I had been with a few girls before I went with Cassie, but she had only been with one guy, as far as I knew. With our marriage, everything was going according to plan. We both worked and saved enough money to start looking for our first home. Then came the kids. My career as a structural engineer was going well, and Cassie was planning to stay home once the kids came along. She was as pretty as the day we saw each other. She had shoulder-length brown hair and long, bushy bangs that went down to her eyes. Her dark eyes sparkled when she laughed. She was only 5 feet 3 inches in height, but she seemed taller because of the way she held herself. She had well-defined hips and a nice waist. I had a nice figure, but I wasn't particularly tall or thin. I was around 5 feet 3 inches and 110 lbs. The best thing about me was that I still had hair. I exercised regularly, so I was in good shape. The sex was great. We had tried almost everything over the years and openly discussed what each of us liked and didn't like. We had a lot of similar tastes, and I was happy with how she behaved, so I assumed she felt the same way about me. Life was good, and the future looked bright. That was until we talked at night. Usually, when we went to bed, we did one of two things. We had sex or we went to bed. We never lay in bed with the lights off or discussed any personal issues. It was a routine we both seemed comfortable with at the time. I've since realized why it was a good policy. John, can we talk about something? What now? Can't it wait until tomorrow? She was silent for a minute. John Clayton Brenner, would you mind if I saw him while he's here? She had my attention. Clayton Brenner was the only guy Cassie had sex with. Aside from me, Clayton was the only guy Cassie had sex with in high school. His family had money, and he always dressed well and drove a fancy car. The other guys tried to keep our cars running, but the girls were drawn to him. He had a choice. He would go with one for a few weeks and then dump her and take another. I knew what he was doing, but I still thought they were the special ones. Unfortunately, Cassie was one of the ones he used and then dumped. He used to brag about his victories to the other guys, who I discovered were very low class. He was also considered pretty good in bed, and as far as I know, none of the girls ever complained about his behavior. Why are you asking me this now? I just don't want to do anything that you might not want to do. I know that Clayton is a very unsympathetic man. We were friends in high school. Cassie, you weren't his friend. You were just a notch on his belt. She didn't say anything, and the pause it became unbearable when, why are you telling me this now? Another moment of silence followed, longer than the first. I'm not going to comment on either. You do what you want to do. Let your conscience be the guide. I've always wanted to say that I rolled over onto my side, turning away from her. It was quiet for. After a while, I heard her crying quietly into her pillow. It was something she'd never done before. I lay perfectly still so she wouldn't notice that I was still awake. She whimpered to herself for a long time and finally fell asleep. It was the longest night of my life. I had no idea why she was crying over my refusal to condone her seeing her ex. I needed to know why she'd waited all day to tell me he was in town and why he was calling her in the first place. Our conversation was short and not emotional enough to bring her to tears. I was missing something, and there was something I didn't understand. I tossed and turned all night trying to figure it out. Of course, there was a simple solution to my dilemma. All I had to do was ask her. Had she already seen him? Why does she want to see him? I was driving myself crazy trying to figure out if she was going to have sex with him. Had she already had sex with him? I knew I couldn't ask her any of those questions. I was determined not to give in to the easy way out. If she told me that would be fine, but I didn't ask. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 5. In the morning, I got out of bed and went to the bathroom to use the toilet. I was still thinking about it. I tried a few mental tricks to stop it, but nothing worked. Before I left the bathroom, I looked at the hamper. I slowly lifted the lid and looked inside. After shifting a few things on top, I found a pair of black silk panties and a black push-up bra. She wore a special occasion bra. She wore it for birthdays, anniversaries, and other holidays that were cause for celebration. Special lingerie always meant special sex. Yesterday wasn't special. We didn't have special sex. I didn't even see her in lingerie. All I knew for sure was that she had worn her black silk panties that day. I had to assume that she had put them on so someone could admire her in them. I carefully placed the bra and panties on the dressing table by the sink. I tried not to make any noise. I got dressed and left the house. The house was always open as I sat sipping my third cup of coffee. my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I pushed my plate of uneaten eggs and oatmeal away, paid the bill, and had no idea what I was going to do next. My emotions were running high. First, I was disappointed in my wife. My second biggest emotion was revenge. Clayton Brenner had called my wife. He was a smooth talker and a devious character. The mere thought of him invading the sanctity of my marriage infuriated me. Women never forget their first lover. Since Clayton was handsome and rich, which made things that much harder. Getting back at his wife was another matter. I knew what Clayton was doing, but I wasn't sure what Cassie was doing. Spirit and intent meant a lot to me. If she did something, I wanted to know what her motivation was and what she was accomplishing. I could judge her until I knew more, but I really didn't want to know more. I spent hours wandering around the city until it was time to go to work. In the end, I decided that I didn't want to know what Cassie did or didn't do. Either way, knowing would affect our marriage. It might even destroy our marriage. I was determined not to let her explain her actions, no matter how hard she tried. If she tried at all, I was tired and depressed. I didn't want to go to work or anywhere else, to be honest. Cassie was already awake. I was sure by now she had found her bra and panties on the dressing table. I tried to visualize what was going on in her head, but I couldn't. There was too much going on in my head to think about what she was thinking. Now she knows that I realized something was wrong. I couldn't concentrate on my work at the office around 10. John, it's Cassie. Me, yeah. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. John, I'm going to visit my mother for a few days. Are you okay? How long is a few days? About a week. Is that okay? Sure. Call me when you're ready to come home. Okay, thank you. Another short pause followed. John, I love you. Me, I didn't answer. I quietly hung up the phone and sat down in my office and cried quietly for the first time in years. I spent the rest of the week on vacation, taking advantage of I knew I was going to do something stupid, but I didn't know what yet. The most likely scenario I could think of was that Cassie went to see Clayton at the motel restaurant and then went to his room and had sex with him just like old times. When she got home, she felt guilty and tried to somehow confess what she had done to me. She waited until we went to bed so I could take her confession a little better. The deed was already done, and she was trying to get some rest. I gave her the green light to justify or make up for her misdeed. I hadn't given her any leeway, and now she was in a bind. She knew she wasn't being completely truthful, and she had no idea what to do next. Of course, I could be wrong. When I got home, I found the black underwear and the trash can in the garage. I spent the next 2 days making myself even more miserable. I stayed in the house and played these mind games over and over again. I felt that Cassie and I had a special relationship, and I wanted more. I wanted to keep it that way. If she confessed, it would ruin the trust between us. If I asked questions, it would do the same. We were trapped. I was sure she wanted to confess to get rid of the guilt and face the consequences. I didn't want her confession because I felt it would ruin our marriage. Cassie had poor judgment. Was she now a cheat, an adulterer, or just a housewife who had screwed up and regretted it? Clayton was a hunter who went after married women. He felt they were the right thing to do. He called me at home, my sanctuary, to seduce my wife. It was pretty easy to see where my aggression should be directed. I intended to solve part of my problem the next day. I didn't care what the consequences were. I found out what room Clayton was in. I decided it was best to take the simple approach. I'd knock on his door. When he opened it, I'd shoot him. At this point, I didn't care if I got caught or I wasn't going to make a big deal of it and thought a low profile would be best. I decided on a .22 caliber Ruger, figuring 3 hollow points in my heart and 1 in my head would do the trick. I'm not a big gun enthusiast, to be honest. The last time I used or cleaned my guns was a few years ago. I've owned a few over the years. A shotgun, a hunting rifle, a .38 caliber pistol, and my Ruger. The problem today was that I couldn't find the Ruger. I tried to think of where I had put it or loaned it to someone, but I couldn't remember. In the end, I just grabbed the Smith Wesson and rushed to the Desa. My plan didn't work out as well as I'd hoped. When I arrived at the motel, I found it crowded with police cars. I stowed my gun under the seat and got out of the car. I walked towards one of the police officers who were escorting a lady from Clayton's suite. She had a blanket slung over her shoulder, and a female officer had her arm around her shoulders. I was afraid to look as they got closer. I recognized the woman. It was Susan Bradford, an acquaintance of ours. She and her husband Barry graduated from high school with us. They had moved to Reading so Barry could open a car dealership. It was sad to see Susan, but I was glad it wasn't Cassie. Susan was also one of Clayton's old standbys, as they were. I heard one of the cops say that she'd locked herself in the bathroom. We had a hell of a time getting her to come out. The shot had to have come from a .22 Ruger. They were carrying Clayton out in a body bag. I can't say I was too upset, but I was looking forward to sending him there myself. Oh well, there are days when things go wrong. On the way home, I got a pizza and a 6-pack of beer. I spent the rest of the week catching up on yard work and fixing some things around the house. I didn't feel like going back to work. Now that my fun with Clayton had been thwarted, I felt a depression sweeping over me. I kept the issue of the newspaper with the story of Clayton's death. The police had. There was no evidence and no witnesses. When Cassie got home, the house was clean and dinner was laid out. It was a cool homecoming, with just modest smiles and a kiss on the cheek. We ate dinner and chatted about how her mom and dad were doing. We were both very careful not to talk about anything controversial. I washed the dishes and brought her a cup of Earl Grey. She sat quietly, just looking at her fingers resting in her lap. She slowly raised her head and said, "John, I'd rather not talk about Cassie right now. Maybe we can talk about it another time. I've had a rough week and I'm really not ready, but please listen to me. Have a nice tea party." There was an awkward silence. I picked up the paper I gave her the article on Clayton and held it out to her. She looked at me and silently read the paper. She put the paper aside and looked at me again, waiting for some sign of approval. I remained silent. "I think I'll take a shower and go to bed early. I'm a little tired from the trip. I haven't been sleeping well lately. I'll sleep on the couch. Good night, John." I watched her walk up the stairs as I carried the cups into the kitchen. It looked like it was going to take a while before things got back to normal. 2 weeks later, I went back to the bedroom. After about 6 weeks, we started having sex again. It was 4 months before our relationship was close to normal. It would never be the same again, but we were close. We didn't have late-night conversations anymore. We never discussed the episode with Clayton. Cassie got pregnant. We were both happy with a baby. We needed a new car. I stopped by Barry Bradford's. He was in the process of divorcing Susan. He wasn't shy about discussing it. She locked herself in the bathroom and couldn't identify the I said. Ruger's sound is muffled, but she still couldn't help but hear the shots. Barry looked at me and said, "I'm trying to figure out what I said wrong." Our conversation up to this point had been open, and Frank and I thought I had tripped over my tongue. I must have seen it somewhere. I didn't want to tell him I was at the crime scene. I have all the clippings and all the information about what happened. It wasn't covered anywhere. The fact that it was fired from a .22 Ruger was never mentioned anywhere either. The police kept that information secret in the interest of the investigation. I don't remember, but I must have heard it somewhere. Barry stared at me for a long time, saying nothing. He knew Cassie had also fallen victim to Clayton's charms. Everyone knew all the girls Clayton had slept with, because he bragged about each one. A wide smile appeared on Barry's face. "John, I'm going to give you the best deal on the best station wagon in this. Let's go and pick one out in the car park." I figured that Barry had figured out where I got my info from. He thought Susan was in the bathroom, but he was wrong. I didn't see the point in correcting him. Barry ended up getting his own Ford dealership, and I got a big discount on a new car every 2 years for the rest of my life. Cassie and I have two beautiful despite one hiccup. Our marriage continued to flourish. Cassie was always there for me, ensuring we remained close. If a guy tried to chat up Cassie at a social event, she'd come over, take my hand and whisper in my ear, "It's time." I always knew what that meant. Cassie was. She was aging well, like a real vamp woman. Some of our regular hosts knew about this little quirk of hers and started reacting to it too. The 20th class reunion came, and we drove to Lancaster. It was like any other reunion with lots of handshakes. Things were going pretty well, and we were having a good time as the evening was coming to an end. Dressed well. A lady who was well-groomed approached our table. It was Janet Brenner, Clayton's widow. She approached us, held out her hand and asked us to dance. I looked at Cassie and she nodded that it was okay. It was a slow dance, and I tried really hard not to do anything inappropriate. The song ended, and we were left standing on the dance floor. She was facing me, and Clayton had an electronic notebook when the police returned his stuff to me. The book was on. I don't know why they didn't keep it or at least read it. I read the entire book several times and then destroyed it. I've been waiting for this opportunity to thank you in person for making my last 12 years absolutely wonderful. My new husband is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I owe you a lot, and I know you'd want me to say thank you. I knew what she meant, but I didn't have the heart to tell her she was wrong. I figured I'd lose nothing if I let her believe my fantasies. I kept my best impassive face and let her talk. I don't know exactly what was in his book, but it seemed like she was able to piece it all together and decided that I was the one who set her free. She leaned over to me and kissed me gently on the cheek. I looked back and saw Cassie watching intently. I walked Janet to her seat, and a large, menacing man stood up. "John, this is my husband, Harold Stanton. Harold, this is John Wagner. I'd like you to meet John Wagner. John, it's great to finally meet you. Janet and I appreciate everything you've done for us." I thought my hand was going to turn blue because he was squeezing it so hard. "I'm glad to see things have worked out so well for you guys. I hope you have many good years together." It was a bit stupid, but I was at a loss for words. I smiled and nodded slightly as I walked back to my table. I noticed Cassie sitting with her head down, rubbing her fingers over her knees. She did that when she was nervous. When I sat down, she started talking. I put my index finger and thumb together and slowly ran them over my lips. She smiled softly at me, and we were both tired, and it was about 2 hours until bedtime, so we didn't say anything else. We did chat a bit about the evening, but not about Janet. I turned out the light and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. Everything was quiet, but I knew she was awake. "Did Janet tell you?" "Janet said she and her new husband are really happy and that I should thank you for that." I lied. It was really quiet in the dark bedroom. Cassie was lying still and quiet. I couldn't even hear her breathing. Cassie, yeah, what did you do with my Ruger? Good night, John. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thanks.